Buying a house in 2026 is not the American dream. For a lot of people, it is a financial trap. Now, that sounds harsh, I know, but look at what the numbers are actually saying. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate was about 6.3% in mid-April 2026. 1 year earlier, it was 6.83%. And back in 2021, buyers were living in a completely different world, with mortgage rates near 3%. That means the financing environment that built the last wave of buyer confidence is gone. At the same time, the cost of the house itself never reset enough to match reality. The material shows that U.S. home prices are up roughly 24% since 2019, while inflation-adjusted household income has barely moved. Down payments rose about 30% from 2019 to 2024. New buyers were spending around 26% of income on housing, versus 20% for existing home owners, creating a 6-point affordability gap, the biggest since 1990. That extra burden works out to about $5,000 a year. So right away, this is the first illusion people need to break. The dream is not just, can I buy? The real question is, what will this cost me every month, every year, and over the next decade? Because in late 2024, a typical U.S. home buyer was looking at roughly $2,400 a month in principal and interest alone, which was more than $1,000 higher than the same kind of buyer would have paid just a few years earlier. And that is before property tax, homeowners insurance, repairs, maintenance, HOA fees, landscaping, pest control, appliance replacement, and all the endless little cash leaks no one includes in the fantasy version of homeownership. So let us make that pain real for a second. Take the current national median list price of about $415,450. Put 20% down, finance the rest on a 30-year mortgage at roughly 6.3%. And your principal and interest alone lands around $2,057 per month. And that is just the starting line. That is before taxes, before insurance, before maintenance, before HOA fees, and before a single unexpected repair. Now add property taxes. In a relatively lower tax state like Florida, using an effective owner-occupied property tax rate of about 0.74%. That same home works out to roughly $256 a month in property tax. But in a high-tax state like New Jersey, where the effective rate is about 2.21%, that jumps to roughly $765 a month. Same priced house, completely different pressure on your wallet. Then add homeowners insurance. A recent Forbes Advisor analysis put the U.S. average at about $2,720 per year for $350,000 in dwelling coverage, or roughly $227 per month. And in many riskier markets, especially storm-exposed areas, that number can climb a lot higher. Then comes maintenance, the bill people love to pretend does not exist. A common rule of thumb is to set aside 1% to 4% of the home's value per year for repairs and upkeep. On a $415,450 house, that is about $346 a month on the low end and $1,385 a month on the high end. And even if your house does not break this month, that money still needs to be mentally there, because roofs age, HVAC systems fail, water heaters die, plumbing disasters do not care about your budget. So now look at the real monthly burn on that median-priced home. A buyer could easily be staring at something like $2,540 a month if they are in a lower tax market and only using a very light maintenance reserve. In a higher tax state, that same house can feel more like $3,050 a month before HOA, utilities, lawn care, pest control, appliance replacement, or surprise repairs. And if you use a more realistic maintenance cushion, the monthly pain can climb much higher. That is the part people do not feel when they are looking at the listing photos. They feel it after closing. And that is why this market is such a psychological trap. People are not only buying shelter, they are buying an identity. They are buying the feeling that they made it. They are buying the story they were told their whole life. That story says, own a home, build wealth, become successful. But the numbers are now saying something very different. They are saying that for many people, home ownership is no longer a guaranteed wealth builder. It is a highly leveraged lifestyle decision with rising carrying costs. That is why so many buyers get hit with emotional whiplash. Before buying, they feel fear of being priced out forever. Fear of missing the market, fear that if they wait, they lose. But after buying, the emotion often changes. It becomes pressure, it becomes regret, It becomes that sinking feeling that the monthly payment has taken over their life. Then one comment said the quiet part out loud. Buying a house can be a massive shock because in some ways, you never truly own it. Even after the mortgage is paid off, the bills do not disappear. Property taxes keep coming. Homeowners insurance keeps rising, maintenance never stops, and one major repair can still hit at the worst possible time. So by the time you finally reach the point where the house is paid off, you may be older, your income may be lower. And the cost of keeping that house may be harder to carry, and that is the uncomfortable truth. Some people spend decades trying to own a home, only to realize later that the home still has the power to push them out. Now, to be fair, another commenter pushed back hard on that and said the problem is not ownership itself, but ignorance. They argued that people need to understand the law, know where to buy, and use every available tax advantage. They specifically brought up Florida's homestead protections, and on that point they are not wrong. Florida's homestead exemption can reduce taxable value by up to $50,000. And local appraisers say that often saves homeowners around $750 to $1,000 per year in property taxes. Florida's Save Our Homes cap also limits annual increases in assessed value for a homestead to 3% or CPI. Whichever is lower, that matters because it proves something important. In 2026, buying a home is not a simple, universal formula anymore. It is no longer enough to just say real estate always wins. Now it is buy in the right market, understand the tax structure, understand insurance exposure, understand what protections apply. Understand whether you are buying land value, house value, or both. Understand whether your state gives you breathing room or slowly strangles you. That is not a fairy tale. That is a financial strategy game, and most people are still entering it emotionally. That is what makes the trap so dangerous. Because people think they are building an asset, but very often they are also sacrificing liquidity, flexibility, and investment capacity. That is the line nobody wants to hear. You think you are building wealth, but sometimes you are just missing the chance to invest. If someone is renting for much less than owning would cost, and the difference is $1,000, $1,500, or $2,000 a month, that is not small money. That is $12,000, $18,000, or $24,000 a year, over 10 years without even talking about compounding. That is $120,000 to $240,000 in redirected cash flow. And once you add investment returns, the number gets a lot bigger. And that is true. Because the real winner is not renter or owner. The real winner is the person who lives below their means. That is why another comment you gave me is so strong. Live beneath your means, save, and invest the rest. And if you buy, do not overspend. That is the actual rule. And it lines up with another comment that says some of the richest people we know live in modest homes. Not giant flashy homes, not homes bought to impress people. Modest homes, lower fixed costs, more cash flow. More margin, more ability to invest. That is how real wealth is often built, quietly. But housing culture in America pushes people in the opposite direction. It tells them to stretch. It tells them to normalize huge payments. It tells them that if they can technically qualify, they should buy. It tells them renting is failure and owning is maturity. Then reality shows up with the invoice. Someone told me their family spent $14,000 fixing the plumbing in their home. $14,000. That is not just an annoying homeowner story. That is the kind of shock that can wipe out months, sometimes years of the so-called equity building confidence people talk about. This is the reality of homeownership. It is not just the mortgage payment. It is a stack of costs that keeps reaching into your paycheck long after the excitement of buying the house is gone. Someone else told me that insurance and maintenance costs are becoming insanely expensive. And that matches what we are seeing across the country. In Realtor.com's March 2026 housing market report, the median list price in the U.S. was about $415,450. The number of active listings rose to around 964,477. New listings reached about 439,000 in March alone. That shows more people are trying to sell their homes, but it does not mean owning a home is suddenly getting cheaper. In Florida, even where some homeowners are getting tax advantages, insurance remains a major wild card. Some local 2026 estimates put annual homeowners insurance in parts of Florida in a rough range of $2,500 to $6,000 statewide. with some coastal markets like Cape Coral often seeing 3,500 to 8,000 or more, depending on risk and property type. There has been some stabilization and even rate relief for some citizens' policyholders. But that does not erase the bigger reality that insurance remains one of the biggest affordability threats in high-risk markets. So when people say my mortgage is manageable, that does not settle the issue, because the mortgage is only one line item. The market is full of owners who can make the mortgage payment but get crushed by everything around it. And here is where the broader housing narrative starts falling apart. A lot of people still believe high prices are only about a supply shortage. But the research I found correctly points out that this is not the whole story. In some regions, yes. Supply is still tight, but in many markets, another force is keeping prices elevated, sellers refusing to accept lower prices, and high-end transactions pushing the median higher than the broader market really feels. That distinction matters. Because median price headlines can make people think the entire market is still rock solid when the ground-level experience is much weaker. Look at March 2026. According to Realtor.com, median listing prices fell 2.2% year-over-year, marking the fifth straight month of annual declines. Active inventory was up 8.1% year-over-year. New listings jumped 21.2% month-over-month to around 439,000. The median days on market was 57 days. And 16.2% of active listings had price reductions. That is not the profile of a market where buyers should still behave like they are desperate. That is the profile of a market that is loosening, and the sales data tells a similar story. NAR reported that pending home sales rose 1.5% month-over-month in March 2026, but they were still down 1.1% year-over-year. Existing home sales fell to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 3.98 million in March, down 3.6% month-over-month and about 1% year-over-year, with inventory at roughly 1.36 million homes, or 4.1 months of supply. So yes, some headlines will try to tell you demand is bouncing back. But the harder truth is that the market is mixed, fragile, and far more negotiable than it was during the frenzy years. That is why the next part matters so much. The market is shifting toward buyers faster than most people realize. Realtor.com said in April 2026 that only 13 of the 50 largest metros still clearly looked like seller-s markets, while 8 already favored buyers and many more were moving in that direction. Their broader framing was that more than 60% of major U.S. housing markets were now buyer markets or close to it. That is a major change in power, and once buyers understand that, the conversation changes from panic to leverage. Now the smart questions become, how many homes are sitting, how many are cutting prices, how long are listings lasting? How many sellers are chasing the market down? What concessions are being offered? Can I get closing costs? Can I negotiate repairs? Can I get a rate buy-down? Can I wait for a better entry? That is the mindset serious buyers should have in 2026. Not fear, leverage. And yet, even with all of these affordability problems, social pressure is still powerful enough to keep demand artificially alive. The material you gave me says around 60% of parents were providing or planning to provide financial assistance to help their children buy a home. Large shares were helping with down payments, co-signing, closing costs, debt payoff, furniture, and moving expenses. Many expected to contribute $25,000 to $50,000, while 23% expected to give $50,000 to $100,000, and 12% were looking at $100,000 to $200,000. Think about what kind of market needs that much outside support just to keep the machine running. That is not a naturally affordable market. That is a market being artificially supported by family wealth. Again, I am not blaming parents. Parents want to help their kids. But from a market perspective, that support can delay price discovery. It can keep demand alive longer than fundamentals justify. It can make a broken affordability picture look healthier than it really is. So what is the actual strategy here? Not never buy and not buy now before it's too late. The strategy is much smarter than that. If you want to buy in 2026, buy only when these conditions line up. Your full monthly carrying cost is comfortable, not merely survivable. You still have cash reserves after closing. You can absorb a large repair without panic. You understand the local property tax rules. You have priced out insurance honestly, not optimistically. The home has been sitting long enough that you have negotiating leverage. Comparable listings are cutting prices. Seller expectations are weakening. You plan to stay long enough that transaction costs make sense. And your purchase does not destroy your ability to save and invest. That last point is huge. Because the buyer who becomes house rich and cash poor is not winning, they are trapped, and if you choose to rent instead. Do not waste the advantage, use the lower fixed cost to build a real balance sheet, build liquidity. Build investments, build optionality, because renting without discipline can absolutely leave you behind. But buying without discipline can bury you. That is why this whole debate needs to mature. The question is no longer, is renting throwing money away? The better question is, which path gives me the strongest financial position over the next 5, 10, and 15 years? Sometimes the answer will be buying, sometimes it will be renting. But in 2026, the old automatic answer is dead. And maybe that is a good thing, because once people stop worshiping the myth, they can start making real decisions. Maybe the dream was never supposed to be a giant mortgage, rising insurance, surprise repairs, shrinking flexibility, and praying your home bails out your math. Maybe the real dream is simpler than that, live below your means. Keep your fixed costs under control, understand the laws of your market, use every tax advantage you legally can. Do not let FOMO make life-changing decisions for you, and only buy when the numbers work for your future, not just your ego. So before you sign up for the dream, ask yourself one final question. Are you building wealth? Or are you just buying into a story someone sold you?